appreciated.
Without objection.
Madam President, I have two items I'd like to briefly mention. The nation is consumed by the fiscal cliff. From all I can tell, the presidential limousine is moving very rapidly toward the fiscal cliff with the president's foot on the accelerator. I'm still hopeful that we'll get a budget agreement that will help us get the economy moving again. But at a time like this, of course, what we all need to be doing is thinking about saving every possible penny to fix the debt. This is a government in Washington, D.C. that's borrowing 42 or 3 cents out of every dollar we spend, which is why I come to the floor today to point out a proposal that's been made to fleece the taxpayers of an additional $15 billion, $50 billion, Madam President, over the next 6 years. This is a proposal that is as brazen as a midday bank robbery on Main Street. It's a proposal by the wind developers of America to say to the taxpayers, please give us $50 billion or so more dollars over the next 6 years to phase out the federal taxpayer subsidy for wind power. Now, Madam President, why is this a brazen fleecing of the taxpayers? Well, first, this taxpayer subsidy began in 1992, 20 years ago, as a temporary subsidy for a new form of energy. Of course, windmills aren't really new. We've had them for hundreds of years. But the idea was give them a little boost so they could get bigger and perhaps help us supply electricity. It was argued at the time by the sponsors of the legislation that this was only a temporary tax credit. Well, as President Reagan used to say, there's nothing that comes as close to eternal life as a government program, and so this temporary taxpayer credit has been renewed time after time after time. It's 20 years old. And wind power, after billions of dollars in 20 years, is, according to President Obama's Energy Secretary, a mature technology. And the Congress has decided that federal taxpayer subsidies for wind power should end at the end of this year. Everyone knows that. This is no surprise. It's been out there for a while, so businesses can plan on this. In other words, it's time for wind power, the Congress has said, to take its place in our free market system and compete with natural gas, compete with nuclear power, compete with hydropower, compete with solar power, compete with other forms of producing electricity. After all, we produce and use about 25% of all the electricity in the world, and we want to make sure we have plenty of it, and that it's at a reliable supply and at a low price. So that's the Congress decision. Yet along come the wind developers who've benefited from this giveaway for 20 years. I say giveaway, Madam President, because according to the Joint Tax Committee, between 2009 and 2014, it's cost taxpayers $14 billion to subsidize windmills in America. I mean, put that in a little perspective. We only spend $5 billion a year on all the energy research the federal government spends. I mean, we could be spending it there. We could be reducing the debt. Instead, we're continuing to subsidize this mature technology. But the brazenness of those who've been receiving this giveaway money, it's hard to imagine how it could be exceeded by a so-called phase-out proposal. They announce, phase us out, even though they're being phased out anyway, phase us out by over the next 6 years through 2018. In 2013, the credit would be 100%. So we just have the credit for next year, just like it is this year. Well, that costs about $12 billion, Madam President, because it's just not a one-year credit. It's not a one-year credit. That means it's a credit for each of the next 10 years. So over the next 10 years, that's $12 billion if we just extend it for 1 year. That's twice the amount of money we spend each year on energy research in America. And then in 2014, the credit would be 90%, and then 80% the next year, and then 70 and 60 and 60 and nothing after 2019. I haven't had a chance for the Congressional Budget Office to evaluate how much that is, but it's tens of billions of dollars. One estimate is 50 billion new taxpayer dollars at a time when we're borrowing 42 cents out of every dollar to keep going something that's already phasing out on its own terms. Madam President, we can't afford that. We simply can't afford that. We can't afford 1 year more of the wind tax credit. That's $12 billion on top of the $14 billion for grants and the production tax credit over the last 5 years. Second, it's interfering with the marketplace. The subsidy to wind developers is so great, they're actually paying distributors of electricity in some cases to take their wind power, which undercuts other forms of electricity that we rely on. Why is that so important? Because we can't rely on wind power. It only works when the wind blows. And it often blows at night when we really don't need it. We have a big wind farm in Tennessee. Tennessee Valley Authority has it. It's the only one in the southeastern United States. Why? Because the wind doesn't blow. And in Tennessee somebody's got a big contract with extra subsidies by the government to put these gigantic towers on top of our scenic mountains. And how much electricity does it produce? Not very much. Of course, the wind only blows about a third of the time. And then it's only reliable about 11% of the time. And you can fly over or drive by these giant windmills at 4 p.m. in the afternoon in the summer when everybody's got their air conditioning on and you really need electricity and nothing's turning. You might go at night and it's turning, but we don't need the wind at 7 or 8 or 9 o'clock at night. That's the problem around the country. It's a puny amount of unreliable, expensive electricity. The idea that somehow the United States of America, with its using 25% of all the electricity in the world, would produce the largest amount of clean electricity, reliable electricity by windmills is the energy equivalent of going to war in sailboats when nuclear submarines are available. So let's let wind power, after 20 years, find its place in our market. There are clearly places where it should be. And where it should be, fine. But there's no need to subsidize it from the federal government and to cause the ratepayers of Tennessee, as an example, to pay more to import electricity produced by wind from South Dakota when we should be using those dollars either to lower our rates, to pay for air pollution control equipment, to build nuclear power plants, of which we have several in the Tennessee Valley, produce about a third of our electricity. They're clean. There's no sulfur, no nitrogen, no mercury, and no carbon. That's the cleanest form of reliable energy we have in the United States or in our valley. So there may be some places where windmills work, but not along the tops of the Tennessee mountains or even in the valleys of Tennessee. And the idea of continuing to waste $50 billion of taxpayer money over the next several years to subsidize a mature technology at a time when the government going broke is as brazen as a bank robbery in the middle of the day on Main Street. And I hope we put a spotlight on this $50 billion giveaway. I hope it becomes the poster child for what's wrong with spending in Washington, D.C., and I hope that the Congress will come to its senses this month and next month and say no to those who come forward with their hand out for this $50 billion giveaway.